Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for the Nick Waterlow Memorial Lecture presented by the Powerhouse Museum as part of NIRIN, the 22nd Biennale of Sydney. Before we begin, we acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, Burruburungal people of the Darug Nation, the Bidjigal people and the Gamaragal people on whose ancestral lands and waters NIRIN gathers. NIRIN is a safe place for people to honour mutual respect and the diversity of expression and thought that empowers us all. Today marks the 6th Nick Waterlow Memorial Lecture, and we are so pleased to have Nick's wife, Juliet Darling, in attendance today. Hello. Nick Waterlow, OAM, was the inspirational artistic director for 3 editions of the Biennale of Sydney and chair of the Biennale Selection Committee in 2000. He had a lifelong commitment and dedication to the arts, mentoring young artists and always supporting and promoting Australian art. His first Biennale as artistic director in 1979 gave Aboriginal artists an international platform for the first time, and he was a passionate advocate for the rights of artists and art workers. 1979 was also a year of activism. Public demonstrations and street marches coincided with the opening of the exhibition, and these struggles are credited with the acceleration of the formation of the Art Workers Union. Protesters at the opening of the Bondi Junction railway station challenged the New South Wales government on the lack of accessible transport options for people with disability. And in August that year, the first images emerged of protesters blocking the path of bulldozers to stop the logging of rainforest at Terania Creek on the New South Wales north coast. This protest is regarded as a watershed moment in Australia's environmental movement and cited as the first time that people physically defended a natural resource. So, it is fitting that this year's Nick Waterlow Memorial Lecture celebrates the work of a new generation of young activists who are at the forefront of mobilising the public into political action for climate change. To begin the discussion, I'd like to introduce myself. Hello, I'm Sara Mansour. I am the co-founder and artistic director of the Bankstown Poetry Slam. I'm also a lawyer, sadly. I do my poetry to give me a little bit of break from my real job. It's something I'm really, really passionate about, and I wrote a piece which I'll be performing today about the women in my life. Before I start, I'd like to give a quick explanation that Arabic is a gendered language. So certain things, I'm not sure who decides what is male and what is female, if a chair is female or male. I don't know who made those decisions, but I'm very pleased to say that the word revolution is a female word. Okay. My grandmother sits us in her lap. It is an ancient ocean of shortcomings and shrapnel. Her voice serrates the air. She teaches us that in Arabic, if you wish to know the place of something, you say it is bi-alba, in her heart. In Arabic, the word revolution is underpinned by an ethereal female spirit. My grandmother says to know this is important, for in the heart of revolution, there is a wind. This wind is the breath of our mothers who carried us through many diasporas, held our hands through many a man's war, sheltered us from storms of silence. Our mothers who traipsed foreign waves, dragging feet through curious alphabets, sewing and unstitching mouths of protest. Our mothers constricted with longing, bound up in dreams of mounting the Milky Way and using their mouth for more than prayer. As men plotted colonies on their skins, invading breasts, wombs, souls, our mothers were on their darkest days still tangerine moons, still a little bit more than light. Alphas in their own right have already carved the path out with their ribs and laid their bones to light the way. We were born swollen with their ambition. We cannot possibly swallow injustice anymore, so we will fight. We will fight like Rosa. We will fight like Malala. We will fight like Angela. We will fight like Clementine. We will fight like Yasmin. We will fight like our mothers fought. Voices blooming with truth and rage. Throat is a Glock cocked and ready to be waged. We have always been ready. So hear the hymns of our hips. hear the hymns of our haunted, hear us in the heart of the open plains, in the heart of every classroom, every hall, every space, every stage. We will beam out the stories of our mothers and how they inherited in us, in our hearts, the winds of revolution. Thank you very much. If you haven't been to a poetry slam before, normally we click to show support, like as if you're in a cool 90s jazz cafe. There's obviously no clicking happening here because we're all online. If you're enjoying this lecture, don't forget to hashtag NIRIN 2020. That's the hashtag that we're using for the Biennale. And before we start, let's get energized for this amazing lineup of speakers. So put your right hand up in the air. Now put your left hand up in the air and wave around like you just don't care. All right? Maybe you care a little bit. I clearly don't care. Okay. Now that we're all energized, our speakers are waving their hands around. It's my pleasure to welcome them. They'll be introducing themselves, and we'll start off with Emilia.
Hi everyone, hope you're all well out there wherever you come from. It's so bizarre doing these online events sometimes because I really love seeing the audience faces, so I wish I could see you all, but my name's Emilia Telford. I'm a proud Bundjalung and South Sea Islander woman. I have the absolute privilege of being the National Director of the SEED Indigenous Youth Climate Network. So for those who haven't heard of SEED before, we are a network of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people from all across the country, standing together to look after our land, our culture, our communities, and our future from the causes and impacts of climate change. So I live in Melbourne now. I've been here for the last 7 years, living on Wurundjeri country, but home for me and where I grew up was in northern New South Wales. So around Tweed Heads was where I was born and where my dad's country comes from. And it's really at home that, you know, where I go back to my roots is where my activism and my work on this issue of climate change really stems from. So I'm really looking forward to exploring, you know, this conversation more with our other panelists, and yeah, hope that you can get something out of this. It's quite a, you know, challenging time at the moment with everything that's going on and the state of the world. So yeah, also want to just send my, you know, support to all of those out there who are going through a tough time at the moment, and a shout out to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander or First Nations people who are joining us.
Thank you so much, Emilia. Next up, we have Ambrose introducing himself.
Hey everyone, I'm Ambrose. I'm from School Strike for Climate. I just first like to acknowledge that we are gathering on stolen land. Sovereignty was never ceded, and there can be no climate justice without justice for First Nations people. Especially now, we must all be united in a call for justice as First Nations communities here in Australia and Black communities across the US who have experienced and fought back against hundreds of years of systemic violence and discrimination. I've been fighting for climate justice since about late 2018. And while a lot has happened since then, the first strike that I helped organise was the March 15 climate strike at Sydney Town Hall, with about 30,000 people attending. After this, we had our May 3rd National Day of Action, a day where school students protested outside their MP offices across the country. I was at Anthony Albanese's office holding a musical sit-in. The next event was obviously the federal election, which wasn't really the outcome we expected. Yet because the current government seemingly doesn't want to act on the climate crisis, it gives people more of a reason to speak up. Our next major strike was on September 20th, with 80,000 people at the Domain in Sydney, 100,000 in Melbourne, 30,000 in Brisbane, 20,000 in Adelaide, 20,000 in Hobart, 15,000 in Canberra and 10,000 in Perth, as well as all the regional and rural areas, brought the national total up to 350,000, with millions of people across the world all striking on the same day. Then, of course, came the bushfires and then the floods. Now the COVID crisis and all the Black Lives Matter protests across the US. What all these events have in common is that people have come together and have shown that people power is extremely important. Now more than ever, we need to speak up. We need to make everyone's voices heard because we need action now.
Absolutely. Ambrose, I Those words really resonated with me. Thank you so much. And now our last speaker, Grace, go for it.
Hey, my name is Grace Vegesana. I'm the Western Sydney organiser for the AYCC, the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, and want to acknowledge the Darug people, Gundungurra people and Tharawal people on whose land I organise. I'm currently in Blacktown in Western Sydney. Yeah, I got involved towards the end of 2017, the week I finished HSC. But when I think about like the reasons I got involved, it's like same as Amelia or Millie, it's because it's like connected to the sense of home. So I grew up in a regional mining town in Botswana, which is the country just above South Africa. And through that had like the foundations of seeing inequality, and then moved here and migrated to Western Sydney and sort of saw the east-west divide. Why Western Sydney? Because Western Sydney is home to half of Sydney's population. It's one of the most culturally, religiously, linguistically diverse regions in Australia. And there's so much stuff that's happening on the front lines in Western Sydney. So there's the extreme heat, with Penrith being declared the hottest place in the world every summer now. There's bushfires that have destroyed a third of Greater Western Sydney. And there's also the connection between like a lot of migrant populations and the impacts that they feel overseas. So a really huge Pacific Islander population who obviously facing sea level rise. So yeah, a lot of the work that I do is based around giving these communities and my community the agency to actually develop solutions to the climate crisis.
Wow, thank you so much, Grace. And I actually didn't know that Penrith was deemed to be the hottest place in the world. I thought the hottest place in the world was wherever I was. Jokes. Such a bad dad joke. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. It's really great to hear a little bit about what you do and your backgrounds, and we'll just jump into some questions. Firstly, I'd like to know how you became a climate activist. You know, was it a light bulb moment? Was it a gradual process? I'd like to know a bit more about that initial journey. Whoever would like to kick it off.
I'm probably the newest to the climate scene. I joined the climate movement late 2018 when I saw the first school strikes in Sydney. And it was more of a gradual, I started and got into it quite a lot, but then doing a lot more than I was originally. And we started organising all the strikes throughout the year. So pretty much as soon as I saw students speaking out on the streets, I thought I can do that too. I can make a difference.
Wow, awesome. And then how long after did you start getting involved?
Probably a few weeks.
Oh, okay. Wow. That's awesome. What about you, Millie?
Well, I actually can't help but feel a little bit old right now because I got involved when I was around your age, Ambrose, at home at my high school up in Lismore in northern New South Wales. And I got involved in the environment group at school. We, were doing all sorts of activities around our school, whether it was, advocating to get recycling or planting trees or, whatever the issues were. But as a young Aboriginal woman, I think I was at an age where I was really starting to connect the dots between like what I was learning in high school science class about climate change with what I have always grown up with, which is, really strong values that come from my, my background as an Aboriginal woman of looking after the land and looking after one another and learning about the, horrible destruction that was going on and has been going on across this country for far too long, ever since colonization. And it was when I started connecting all the dots and really starting to understand my responsibility as an Indigenous person to look after our land that I realized I really had to step up and do more. And, it was sort of learning that all those things that we were doing in our high school were making a difference. But at the same time, I really started to look at the root causes of climate change and acknowledging that we need to see really big transition, and that change is only going to happen if we stand up and demand it. And so it was at that point that I started getting involved in the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, actually,
Oh, wow.
as a high school student. And the journey, I'll speak about it a bit later, but it all sort of started there. But I think being sort of almost 10 years down the track now, I'm sure you can tell why I start to feel a bit old, because I always be the youngest person in the room, and I don't know where time's gone, but that has quite quickly changed.
Well, you look very youthful right now, so if that's any consolation. I know how you feel. You started to think, oh no, I'm aging, but yeah, we're doing good. We're doing good. Grace, how about you?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of both. I think it was a gradual journey of like really learning from people in my community and learning from really great teachers I had, who were like, oh yeah, actually the inequality that you're seeing isn't just like one singular event. It's like part of the systems that we live under, that form like these bigger picture issues. I think for my light bulb moment, if I had to pin one down, it was sitting in like a year 12 class, a history extension class, and my teacher was talking about colonization and was just like, oh yeah, so the fact that rising emissions just happened to correlate with the Industrial Revolution and imperialism isn't just like a mistake, like it's actively destruction of land and property and people's like cultures and lives. And I was like, oh, this is very bad. We should do something about it, but was in the middle of HSC, so couldn't do anything. And yeah, got involved with the AYCC literally a week after I finished HSC. And yeah, it was just like a really big journey of like realizing that I'd never heard about climate change as like part of the formal education curriculum throughout high school. And so it was really figuring out what issue I wanted to like work on for pretty much the rest of my life as a young person, and working out where the next big problems in our society were going to take us.
Okay, that's really interesting. And it kind of leads into my next question. Climate change is inextricably linked to the economic system. So how should big corporations be kept accountable, and to whom? Amelia.
I think first,
You go,
Ambrose.
No, you go. I'll go after you.
okay. I think the first thing that they have to do is stop greenwashing, because that doesn't help.
Yeah.
And a lot of these big businesses are trying to do that.
So sorry, before you keep going,
Yeah.
for those who don't know what greenwashing is, could you please just explain?
Yeah, pretty much it's when they're trying to act environmentally friendly when really behind the closed doors they're not. And unfortunately, that's something you see quite a lot around. You even see like on something that's got complete plastic packaging, and it goes on about how it's environmentally friendly, and when it's covered in plastic, and it's not a good look for them. But I think that really the businesses just need to realize that this is something that is going to affect them, whether they like it or not. If they don't take action themselves and prepare for something that is going to eventually affect them, then I don't know what's going to happen to their business in the future. And I think that just a first step is supporting those who are trying to fight for their futures. And we had a few thousand businesses sign up on September 20 last year to support the climate strikes, and pledged, I don't remember exactly what they pledged, I'd have to look at that, but they signed up to support us. So I think that's one of the first steps, supporting the movements that are fighting for climate justice, and go from there. Take small steps one at a time, and eventually it'll make a difference.
Yeah, it's like not paying lip service, but actually doing something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, awesome.
Less
Millie, sorry.
action.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, Millie, you were going to say something as well?
Yeah, I think unfortunately that's what this whole issue comes down to at times is, you know, the greed in the world that where people and big corporations, big companies feel like they're allowed to take and take and take without giving back. You know, where they can treat people poorly in order to just make a few quick dollars, or you know, just put some people's lives valued more than others. And so, you know, a great example of what Ambrose was saying about greenwashing is looking to, you know, at SEED, we've been working with communities in the Northern Territory fighting gas fracking on their country with the Aboriginal communities up there. And Origin Energy, some of you might have heard of them. They're a big energy company. You might, you might have electricity with them, or gas, or even internet with them. They're a really, really big company. They've got millions of customers across the country, and they would like you to believe that they're a good energy company, that they care about climate change, and that they, you know, mean business when it comes to climate change. But they're saying that on one hand, and then, you know, on the other hand, they're wanting to open up what would be one of the largest gas reserves in the Southern Hemisphere, which, you know, if it was to be fracked, it would really basically limit our ability to limit global warming to less than 1.5 degrees, which would be pretty catastrophic, and it's quite scary. So that hasn't gone ahead yet. But, you know, Origin, as I said, they have millions of customers, I think about 4 million, I think. And, you know, when you ask who do they need to be accountable to, well, in a business sense, it's their customers, but in a more moral sense, it's the communities that are on the front lines of these projects that they're building. And Aboriginal communities up in the Northern Territory, traditional owners, have told them time and time again that they don't want this fracking to happen on their land. They don't want their water to be threatened, and yet they're not listening. So I think that's where, you know, again, it comes back to people power and us demanding that they're accountable to their customers and to the members of the public who, you know, it's our future that's on the line. It's our it's our culture, it's our communities. So yeah, we really need to change business as usual and not allow these big companies to have all the power and make decisions hand in hand with our government, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
A lot of Origin ads on TV about how they're good energy and sustainable.
We've got some good marketing, guys. Grace, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah,
Love to hear your perspective.
I think Ambrose and Millie really covered that. But yeah, I remember when I was working at Future Super, who are Australia's first fossil fuel-free super fund, accidentally started the Not Business as Usual Alliance that Ambrose had mentioned, where 3,000 Australian and global businesses ended up striking on September 20, because they didn't want to choose between their paycheck or the planet, was the principle around it. And I think something that's really important to remember is, like, just because these businesses are doing like one act of like really great solidarity and like standing up to demand a better future, that doesn't mean that they're gonna, like, by their own will continue to do that. And it's actually 100 companies that emit 70% of global emissions. And so actually holding companies to account doesn't just mean like them striking for one day. It's a long-term held accountable to communities. And and even when you think about renewable energy, to reach 100% renewable energy, you need 0% fossil fuel usage. So even if we did get to 100% renewable energy, that would be an economic transition. It doesn't mean that there's justice for communities on the ground. And so that's why, like, the work that like a lot of climate justice activists do now is really important, to be building community-led solutions from the ground that work for communities, and not just to continue to profit for big corporations.
Absolutely. And I guess it's all about the education process as well. So I guess in terms of my next question, I'd really like to know, what has been your biggest challenge? I'm hearing kind of little bits and pieces, in educating people, in getting the word out there, in mobilizing groups, but I'd like to know individually, what have your challenges been in being climate activists? Grace, we can start with you.
Sure. Some challenges. Oh, lots of things. I think one of the biggest things that I'm realizing more and more nowadays is like actually around community accountability. And working in Western Sydney, it's a super diverse area. There's only so many languages that I can speak. I can't reach all of these people. Not everyone like respects young people, and that's like completely fine. Like, I'm not going to march up to like the head of a church or an imam and be like, oh yeah, young people make all the decisions. So it's actually finding that balance of like strategically building community and getting to know people to build your own like clout, because you can't just like march into a place and be like, yep, like 100% renewable energy, done. And so it's like actually finding that balance of how much can young people lead and when do we need to like start respecting elders and stuff, and like people who actually hold power, is something that I'm working on right now. Don't have too many answers, but it's happening.
Slowly but surely. Awesome. Millie, Ambrose?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of challenges, but I think the benefits definitely outweigh them, and that's what's kept me going for so long. I remember being at school and really, getting quite frustrated, being really passionate and not having that many other people around me at the time who, sort of thought in the way that I did or felt the way that I did. And it was really hard to get other people active. And so, over time, I think I've gotten better at, talking to people in a different way that makes them, see how they're connected to this issue and bring them in. And I think, through doing that and through being involved in a movement like this and surrounding yourself with other passionate people, like I've made some of my best friends in life. And, I think they make me better, like they make me a better person. But also, I mean, I can't not say that a big challenge has been being a young Aboriginal person in a very, unfortunately, a very white movement when it comes to climate change. And, that is really hard, especially when this issue is impacting our communities first and worst. And, can explain that a bit more down the track, because I think I saw a question coming up about it. But it's a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility to do this work, and to be able to represent our people, but at the same time to have people understand that our communities are incredibly diverse across the whole country, and it's why we need everyone to be a part of this movement, no matter what the color of your skin is, no matter how much money you have, no matter like across all the differences, like there's a role for everyone. And I think that it can be really challenging, but I guess it goes back to, this isn't just an issue about climate change and the environment. It's about social justice, it's about racial justice, it's about refugee justice, it's all these issues combined. That can be really overwhelming, but by surrounding yourself with really awesome people, it really continues to build you up and give you hope and keep you going.
Yeah, and you can build that community, like you said. Ambrose, what have been some of your challenges?
Probably the biggest challenge would be people who don't want to listen to young people, especially some right-wing commentators on radio, the shock jocks, who like to make comments about the strikers who are just trying to speak up for their future. But I think what the biggest challenge probably is that people in this movement can't do everything, and sometimes that's not necessarily always understood. And there's a lot of work that goes into the movement, and sometimes it gets put on certain people who already have so much other things that they've got to do to keep this movement going. But it's something that I think that the climate movement is just constantly improving and getting better, and people are working really well together. And I feel like when I first started, I wouldn't have expected all the things that I've learned, all the people I've met, hundreds of people I've met personally over the last year or so. And it's just really powerful, and it's an amazing experience to be part of. So really, there's not really massive challenges. It's more positive. Yeah.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And on that note of the movement getting better and more young people really, taking ownership, taking the reins, getting involved, I feel that the movement in and of itself is becoming more intersectional. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the importance of intersectionality in this space, and who can speak to that if you have any personal experiences to share.
Do you want to go, Grace, and then I'll go?
Yeah, sure. Intersectionality. So that refers to lots of different people working on lots of different issues. So like Millie mentioned before, the climate crisis isn't just an issue about the environment. It's also how climate change affects people and who are the people who are being affected first and worst. And so, lots of reasons for intersectionality and why that's important. And like Ambrose mentioned, like you can't do everything as one person. And so as we sort of realize just how widespread and like systemic, so deep into like the systems that we live under, climate change is, it's really important to have lots of people stepping up to take ownership of the thing that they want to lead on to make sure we have a better future across the board. So it's not just about like fossil fuels and renewable energy. It's actually about creating the communities that we want to live in and we want to see. And this is, I don't know if anyone watches The Simpsons. I hope you do. But there's this, I don't know what season it's from. I feel like it's season 6. But there's this like one scene that's like, oh, it's a crisis and an opportunity. It's a crisis-tunity. And yeah, that's what the climate crisis is. Like, it's this horrible, like, global issue, but it's also a thing that's going to affect everyone at some point. And so it's an opportunity for us to really reshape the world. And so that's where intersectionality comes into it. It's like one organization or one group or one person can't fix all of the issues, but if we all chip in a little bit to each of the issues, then we can actually completely fix how our world works and have a more like equal and fairer future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also acknowledging that people at the intersections may not have the access to education or the access to the resources that other people do. And so, making the movement more inclusive essentially benefits all different types of communities in the long run. Millie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in particular.
Yeah, I feel like you've both summed that up really well. And, it comes back to, we're all impacted by climate change and a lot of other issues too, but some people are impacted more than others. And, it's those people and those communities that, it's those who are, on like experiencing something that are going to be best placed to work out what the solution is or how to, solve that problem. And so by building up those people, it's how we can build a more diverse movement. So, that's really what we identified with SEED, because when I got involved in AYCC almost 10 years ago, I was one of the only Indigenous young people. And that was really hard for me because no one, really understood the issue in the way that I was seeing it. It was all just about carbon dioxide and having a price on pollution and all this stuff that I was like, I don't know, like, what does that even mean? Like, as a high school student. But when you talk about people and communities and our, the fact that as Aboriginal people, we'd already lost so much. And really, to me, this was just our fight to stand up for what we have left and to fight for our future and for, our identity. Like, it's our land is who we are. It's, everything goes back to country. And so being able to fight for country, like for our land and water and our, our stories are in the land. Everyone sees issues in different ways. And so we need to be able to address those in order to make space for everyone to be involved.
Absolutely. Ambrose, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think you all covered it pretty well. I think it's just only recently joining some of the Slack groups, just seeing how all the different movements are working together. I've joined a few where there's people from all different movements, and even within the climate movement, there's people from all the different organizations who are just contributing to things to make their impact even more powerful. And yeah, so I think that with educating people is really powerful, and hopefully we're going to do that in School Strike, because we actually had something like 150 new people who wanted to sign up after May 15. So hopefully we can put them to good use and help all movements in the end.
Yeah, awesome. And just picking up on what you just said about Slack groups. So what exactly are Slack groups for the older people that are listening?
Yeah, so Slack is a platform that a bunch of different organizations use and workplaces use to organize. We used to use Facebook Messenger, and then that got a bit too messy with way too many chats and way too many messages. It's just a lot simpler, because then you're not getting notified for every single conversation in School Strike. It's just a lot better for us and better for people's mental health, because then they're not having to read through literally everything.
Oh, wow. And can anyone get involved in the Slack group?
It depends on the group. If you're a student, you can go to our website. I can get the link and put it in the Zoom chat, but you can go to our website and sign up to volunteer. And I think that right now we're just doing onboarding for school students, and in the future, people who do sign up who are adults or out of school, we will be doing onboarding for them for how they can help as an adult supporter or a mentor. And yeah, there's lots of different organizations you can help out with as well.
Wow, that's really interesting. Awesome. We might go touch on how people can get involved and what are the practical things that they can do a little bit later. I just wanted to ask one more question before we move into some more specific questions. So we're seeing how the Black Lives Matter movement in America has gone from peaceful protests to destructive riots and looting. And with the ongoing anxiety from COVID-19 adding to that, what do you guys think about protest culture right now? Is it too much, too dangerous? What are your thoughts on that?
Where to start? I mean, look, like it's I knew this question was coming, and I wish that I had been a bit more prepared, but I think the violence that we're seeing from protesters or from people who are within those protests, unfortunately fueling the violence, trying to make it worse. It's really intense to watch. But I think at the same time, and I know we've got a lot of students on this call, and it's really hard to think about this, but on the project the other night, Nikia Louie, a really amazing Aboriginal woman, said this in a way that really stood out to me. She highlighted that, George Floyd, the man who was killed by police in the US, who, this isn't just about him, but, one more death is what's sparked this outrage. He had a policeman kneeling on his throat, and that's incredibly graphic to think about. It's an act of violence in itself. And so his last words were, "I can't breathe." And the same goes for an Aboriginal man in New South Wales, not too long ago in our recent history here. And so I think it's really hard, because when we look at the violence that's going on in the streets now, and we care about that more than we care about the violence against people's lives, I think that's what gets really hard for me to grapple with, because as Martin Luther King, who many of you would, probably have heard quite a bit about from the civil rights movement in the US, there's a pretty famous quote from him saying that, rioting is the language of the unheard. And when people have stood up and they've signed petitions, they've sent letters, they've talked to media, they've talked to politicians, they've tried everything, what more can you do to make people listen? And I think that's really what's going on. And we at SEED, at AYCC, we protest and standing up for our right to be able to do that. But I think, you know, this is how people are trying to get their voices heard. And when, you know, when they're not being listened to, you know, you think about it when you're a kid, like, how do you, you know, yeah, there's just, it's a really hard one. And I think we really need to be able to try and ensure that these spaces are safe for everyone. But what we also need to realize is that the world isn't safe for everyone, and that's what's happening. Black and brown people of color are dying, and we need to address that. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Grace,
I think
I'd love to. Oh, sorry.
I think that it's the protests that are going on in America, even though it's obvious that they might not be safe and they might have damaged people's lives. But the thing is, the properties that have been looted and things like that, people's lives are more important than property. And if the way that some of the police are acting isn't right, and the protests did start off peaceful, and that's how most protests do start off. All school strike protests are peaceful and we're non-violent and everything like that. But I think in America, from what I've seen, the reaction from the police sparked something that they couldn't stop, and the people are fed up with how they've been treated. And they want change, and this is unfortunately the only way that they see that they're able to make change, because they haven't been listened to, and that's not right, but it's what's happened. So this is what's happening now, and I think that's important, that we need to listen to the people who are speaking up, because if we don't, then it's not going to get better. And yeah, so I think that just in the end, we do need to make change, because those people who can't speak up are being even more affected.
Mm-hmm. That has a lot of parallels as well with, you know, the discussion we're having about climate change and activism in that space, and just making sure that, you know, doing things in a peaceful way, but then at some point enough becomes enough. And so what's the next step, and how can we make the movement more powerful? Grace, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah. I think Millie and Ambrose have really covered that. I think with like seeing things like violent protests and riots, I think there's a lot of people who are using this as a moment to actually really push forward what needs to be heard. And I mean, that's not for everyone, and that's fine. But I think there's also like a tipping point of how much activism can you do without speaking out and making yourself heard. So like there's lots of examples of like quieter activism, like throughout the civil rights movement, and like sitting in like the wrong seat on buses and stuff like that. And even now there's examples of like American football players like kneeling during the national anthem during protests. There's young Aboriginal men like Latrell Mitchell and Josh Adokar who refused to sing the Australian national anthem during the NRL. And it's only so far that will take you for some people. And so it's actually that the work of these things, and like, as Ambrose said, like property is not as valuable as human lives. And I think there's a lot of companies that have had property destroyed who have actually like tweeted that and been like, our stuff is replaceable. Like you can't replace like 400 plus Aboriginal lives who have been like caused by death in custody. And so, yeah, I think there's like, I understand where it comes from. And I think it's like this movement is a very broad amount of people, of like, some people want to take actions that like require them to educate themselves and educate the people around them. And there's also people who want to like riot and take direct frontline action. And all of these things, as long as like they have a united cause and have a strategy, actually can create the change. And like, yeah, making sure like there's areas that are safe for people and not like police like knocking on doors trying to arrest people who are not trying to engage, which is starting to happen now. So I think it's not the protest culture that's actually dangerous. I think it's a reaction to systemic causes of violence that have happened since colonization and since slavery, that are sparking these responses of violence that have been suppressed for so long.
Yeah, well, it's kind of what you guys are saying. They're violent responses, but these responses are initial reactions to the violence that's been going on for so long and been perpetuated against these communities. I'd like to ask some specific questions now. Grace, actually, I'll start with you because you've been doing some interesting work with business groups. It would be great if you could explain what kind of work you've been doing with those groups and how that work bolsters climate change activism.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mentioned before the Not Business as Usual Alliance, and I can link that in the chat as well if people want to check that out. But lots of different things around pushing corporations to actually be better and take that first step to realizing like what they contribute to these problems. So having 3,000 Australian and international businesses strike for the climate last year, and those are like big names like The Iconic and Atlassian and Ben & Jerry's and like all of these things that are like very household names, actually standing up to demand a better future. Thank you, Ambrose. Yeah, and something else that we at the AYCC did was during University O Weeks, we partnered with Ben & Jerry's to pretty much give out free ice cream to anyone who enrolled to vote in the federal election, which is super fun. Free ice cream is always really good. They created a specific flavor that was around climate change, and like the logo was like a giant like earth ice cream melting. It was very fun.
So good.
But yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can push corporations to be better. Corporations aren't just going to decide one day that they want to fix climate change. It's like a process of actually campaigning and educating staff and like talking to shareholders and stuff like that. Yeah, so a lot of that work is actually creating another intersection, like we talked about earlier, that contributes to actually fixing this problem and really starting to make sure that everyone is on board to actually contribute to a better future.
Oh, wow. That's honestly so amazing. And also, I'm here for free ice cream anytime. Next time there's free ice cream, please give me a buzz. Millie, as a founder of Seed Mob and also a proud Bundjalung woman, how has your culture influenced or shaped your activism? And I'd love to know more about how it also influenced you in getting involved in Seed Mob.
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned this at the start. Like for me, I've always, grown up in my family, proud of who I am. Like my dad's an Aboriginal and South Sea Islander man. My mum is a white woman, Pakeha woman from New Zealand. And, from a very young age, I was aware of the injustices and racism in the world because I saw the way people treated my mum differently to the way they treated my dad. And then when they saw us together as a family, it was just, it's been an interesting, it's not interesting. It's the lived experience of many of us, really. But I think we as kids always had really strong values, and those values go back to, the values that underpin Indigenous culture across the world. And, it's about respect and responsibility and looking after one another, looking after the land. And if you do those things, then, the world is really a much better place. Like it's not that hard. It's pretty simple, really, when you think about it. And so for our people, we've looked after our land sustainably for tens of thousands of years. Like prior to invasion, of this country, our people had lived sustainably, and would only take what was necessary, but also give back and you know, there's so many different stories that you can talk about when it comes to that, and the importance of managing our land. Like, I think that, you know, there was a lot of talk around the time of the bushfires about if Aboriginal people had been managing our land in ways that, you know, we know that works, those fires like would not have been so extreme. And it's not just that, it is the impacts of climate change as well. But yeah, like our people deserve and have a right to play a leadership role in movements to, you know, tackle climate change. And so for me, like as a young person, I think I was learning so much like in high school about all these issues in the world. And when I think the moment for me that I really realized that we needed to build SEED as a branch of the Australian Youth Climate Coalition was when I realized that it's not okay for like just, you know, one or a handful of young people to represent an entire community. Like that's not how it works. And you know, a term that is often thrown around is like tokenism, like being the token Black person or the token young person, or, you know, just ticking the box really. And, you know, that's not good enough. And so it was when, I was sort of like talking to a whole lot of people that really inspired me and that I looked up to and who've guided me, that, you know, we talked about what it was going to take to build SEED as, you know, an Indigenous youth climate movement for young people all across the country, knowing that so many of our young people were feeling the same and wanting to take action in line with our culture and our values, but not seeing that in the broader movements that we, you know, see going on. So I think there's, a bit of background, but it's definitely, you know, I think culture really needs to be at the forefront of this work, not just for First Nations communities, but for all communities, you know, and seeing that leadership from people who are first and worst impacted.
Wow, it's really inspirational. Thank you. Ambrose, what do you say to commentators that say you're too young, you shouldn't be taking time off school? And also, I'd like to know what message you have for young people who are kind of hesitant or not sure if they want to get involved in this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, to the first part, my first experience with commentators is probably back in March last year when I was on the Alan Jones show speaking to Steve Price. I was told that I was a smart but confused 14-year-old, and that I needed to research more and actually think if I'm being lied to by the adults that apparently organized our movement when it was students that were doing that. So I think that really the commentators need to realize that no, it's not adults organizing this, it's actually students. We're a student-led movement. We're the ones that are making the decisions. We're not being led and told what to do. And I think that that's something that they need to learn. And for young people who are hesitant to join, I say join. It's lots of fun. You'll meet lots of people. We're a big dysfunctional family that all loves each other. And I think, so pretty much I put the link in the chat before, but you can join on our website at schoolstrikeforclimate.com/join, and you'll be onboarded and led into the movement at your pace, at how you want to join. And you won't be expected to do lots of work. You might just want to come to a few meetings and see how you can help, or even just helping with learning how to come into, once we have protests in person again, you might want to help with a crafternoon or even a virtual crafternoon and all things like that. So if you're hesitant, don't worry. We're here to support you. And so just do what you can.
Do what you can. That's a really, really great last remark. And I guess just as some closing comments, if you guys had anything else to say to our wonderful virtual audience, hello, maybe just if they need to go look for more information, where should they go? Or if you have one piece of really good advice that you'd like to give before we head off.
You go, Ambrose.
Okay. I think just final piece of advice from me is your voice counts. Your voice is powerful. And when you stand up and speak out, that's what matters, and that's what will make change.
Amazing.
I'll back that up, and then I'll say if you want to hear more about SEED or want to get involved, for young Indigenous people, you know, we have a lot of SEED volunteers and would love for you to get involved. If you're non-Indigenous, highly recommend getting involved in AYCC, which Grace might speak to about how you can do that. But if you want to follow and support SEED's work, follow us on Instagram. We're at SEEDmob, and then on Facebook, we are the SEED Indigenous Youth Climate Network.
Amazing. Thanks, Millie.
Yeah, I'll plug AYCC. Yeah, I think my bit of advice is that there's a role for everyone in this movement, and there's like a lot of issues around like young people not wanting to commit, or like not having capacity, or like actually you're terrified for your future and you don't want to be involved in everything, and that's completely fine. Like the AYCC has like a dedicated meme team whose like only job that they want to be involved in is like actually just making memes, and like there's really a space for everyone at whatever level that they're at. Yeah, and I think something that I joined the AYCC for was because I really wanted to learn more, and like felt like I wasn't educated enough, or like didn't know enough, or like wasn't confident enough like speaking about this stuff. And so yeah, really joined, came to a bunch of trainings, was like, okay, you know what, like I think I've got this, because like I can feel climate change in Western Sydney, and like I know that my eyes aren't lying to me. And so yeah, everyone has like experienced climate change in some form as young people, and yeah, there's always space in the movement for you. Come and make memes for us, it'll be great.
That's a great place to leave it off, guys. Thank you so much. Round of applause to all of you amazing people. It was great to hear your perspectives, and I thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this panel today. Unfortunately, we run out of time. It was probably the fastest hour of my life. So again, thank you all so much. Thank you to the people that have joined us today online. And also just last comment, alongside the Powerhouse Museum, the 22nd Biennale, NIRIN has now reopened for those who aren't aware. So please check the website for specific dates for each venue for the events that are now open. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.